The banker laughed. Not a small laugh, the kind that carries across a lobby, past the teller windows, all the way to the front doors. He was holding a glass jar full of coins, both hands under it because it was heavy, and he was laughing. "Sir," he said, loud enough for the woman at the next desk to hear, "this isn't a deposit, this is a hobby." The man across the desk didn't move. 72 years old, clean shirt, hands folded in his lap. He had carried that jar into the bank in a canvas tote bag, and he had set it on the desk with both hands, the way you set down something you respect. "I'd like it counted," the man said. His voice was even, quiet. The banker smiled. 31 years old, branch manager for 14 months. He looked at the jar, then at the man, then back at the jar, and he shook his head. "We don't have a coin counter. The nearest one is 40 miles, and honestly," he tapped the glass, "I'd be surprised if there's $300 in here." The teller behind him was watching. So was the woman at the next desk. So were the two customers in line at the window. They all heard it. That was the part that mattered later. The man named Earl Dempsey did not respond. He stood up slowly, picked up the jar with both hands, lowered it back into the canvas tote, and walked out of the First Heartland Bank branch in Caldwell County, Missouri on a Tuesday morning in March. He drove home in a 1994 Ford F-150, same truck he'd driven for 26 years. The jar sat on the passenger seat where his wife Margaret used to sit. He didn't say anything to it. He just drove. Earl Dempsey was 72 years old, and he had lived on the same 43 acres outside of Hamilton, Missouri, for 51 years. He had not inherited the land. He had not been given it. He had bought it in 3 pieces between 1974 and 1981, working 2 jobs to do it. Days at the Bendix plant in Kansas City, evenings and weekends fixing tractors and small engines out of a barn he built himself. The barn was still standing. So was the house, which he had also built, mostly alone, over the course of 2 summers in 1976 and 1977. His wife Margaret had helped him hang the drywall. She had made coffee and brought it out to him in a thermos, and she had told him the kitchen window needed to face east so she could see the sunrise while she made breakfast. He had built it that way. Margaret died of pancreatic cancer in 2019. She was 68 years old. They had been married for 46 years. She had kept every receipt, every bank statement, every tax return, every utility bill that had ever come into the house, organized by year, in folders, in a metal cabinet in the back room. Earl had never opened the cabinet. He didn't need to. He knew it was there. What Earl had kept instead was the jar. The jar lived in the basement workshop, on a shelf above the workbench his father had given him in 1971. It was an industrial pickle jar, 5 gallons, clear glass, with a wide mouth and a heavy iron lid that screwed on tight. He had started filling it the week he started at Bendix, in October of 1973. Every Friday afternoon for 46 years, he had come home from work, walked down the basement stairs, and emptied the change from his pockets into the jar. He had also, every Friday, dropped $1 silver into the jar. Just one. A habit Margaret's father had taught him before they were married. A man who can't save $1 a week, the old man had said, can't save anything. Earl had done it for 46 years, every Friday, same day, same jar. He never counted what was in it. He never opened it after the first year. The lid had rusted shut by 1980, and he had liked it that way. The jar was not for spending. The jar was for being there. When Margaret died, Earl had carried the jar up the basement stairs and set it on the kitchen table for one afternoon. He had sat across from it and looked at it and not said anything for 2 hours. Then he had carried it back down and put it on the shelf. That was in 2019. He had not touched it again for 6 years, until the first letter came. The first letter came in January. It said the mortgage on the property, a mortgage Earl had paid off in 1998, had been reactivated due to a documentation review by First Heartland Bank's Portfolio Compliance Division. The letter said Earl owed $47,400 in deferred principal and would need to remit payment within 60 days or begin foreclosure proceedings. Earl had read the letter twice. Then he had walked to the metal cabinet in the back room and opened it for the first time since Margaret died. Margaret had kept everything. The original mortgage from 1981, the amortization schedule, Every monthly payment receipt. The final payoff letter from First Heartland Bank dated March 14, 1998, signed by a vice president named Donald Whitfield, stamped "Paid in Full" in red ink. Earl had taken the payoff letter to the bank. That was the day he had also taken the jar. He had taken the jar because Margaret, in her last week, had told him something he had not understood at the time. She had said, "Earl, when something happens, and something is going to happen, take the jar. Don't sell it. Take it. Take it to the bank. Make them count it." He had asked her what she meant. She had not answered. She had been on a lot of medication. But Margaret had been a bookkeeper for 34 years. She had worked for the same firm in Cameron, Missouri for her entire career. She had been a woman who did not say things without a reason. So Earl had taken the jar, and the branch manager had laughed at it. The branch manager's name was Tyler Brennan, 31 years old, MBA from the University of Missouri. He had been hired in January of 2025 by First Heartland's regional office and given the Hamilton branch as his first solo posting. His performance review structure was tied to two metrics: deposit retention and what the bank's internal documents called legacy account resolution, closing out, settling, or restructuring old accounts that had been sitting on the books for 30 or more years. Tyler had a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet had 411 names on it. The names were sorted by account age, oldest first. Earl Dempsey was on row 17. Tyler had spent, by his own time-tracking software, 14 minutes on Earl's case before sending the first letter. 14 minutes to review a 44-year banking relationship. Earl was not the first. By the time he walked into the branch with the jar, Tyler had already sent reactivation letters to 28 other account holders in Caldwell and Clinton counties. 6 had paid. 4 had sold property to settle. 2 had died during the process. The rest were still in negotiation. Earl was supposed to be number 29. Earl drove home from the bank with the jar on the passenger seat, and he did not call a lawyer that day. He called one the next morning. The lawyer's name was Susan Kepler. She had an office above a hardware store in Cameron. She was 61 years old, had practiced rural property law for 34 years, and she had known Margaret Dempsey from the bookkeeping firm. Margaret had done Susan's quarterly filings for 20 years. Susan had read the reactivation letter and the 1998 payoff document side by side, and she had told Earl plainly that the reactivation was almost certainly improper. But she had also told him something else. "Earl," she said, "if they're doing this to you, they're doing it to other people. And if it's a pattern, that changes everything. We don't just need to defend you, we need to find the pattern." She had asked if he had any other documents, anything from the original mortgage period, receipts, statements, anything Margaret might have kept. Earl had told her about the cabinet, and about the jar. Susan had not understood about the jar. Earl had explained, slowly the way Margaret had explained it to him, that Margaret had told him to bring the jar to the bank, that she had been a bookkeeper, that she had not said things without reasons. Susan had listened. Then she had asked Earl if she could come look at the jar. She had driven out to the farm on a Thursday afternoon. Earl had brought her down to the basement workshop and shown her the shelf above the workbench. The jar sat where it had sat for 46 years, heavy, dusty, the lid rusted shut. Susan had looked at it for a long time. Then she had said, "Earl, do you know what's in there?" "Coins," Earl said. "Change from my pockets, and $1 silver a week every Friday since 1973. Susan had counted on her fingers, slowly. "Earl, that's about 2,400 silver dollars. Earl nodded. "Sounds about right." "Earl," she looked at him. "Silver dollars from 1973 forward. What kind?" He had not known what she meant. "Did you buy them new from the bank, or did you get them somewhere else?" Earl thought about it. "Margaret's father gave me the first roll. After that, I'd ask the tellers at First Heartland. Every Friday. They'd pull whatever they had. Sometimes new ones, sometimes old ones from the vault, whatever they had on hand." Susan had stood very still in the basement. "Earl," she said, "we need to get a coin appraiser out here, today if possible." The appraiser was a man named Howard Linley from Kansas City. He drove out the next morning. He was 68 years old, had been a numismatist for 41 years, and he was a friend of Susan's husband. Howard brought tools. He cut the rusted lid off the jar with a small saw, careful not to scratch the glass. He poured the contents, slowly, in batches, onto a clean white sheet on Earl's kitchen table. It took 4 hours to sort. There were 2,387 silver dollars in the jar. Of those, 312 were Morgan dollars from before 1921. Of the Morgans, 47 were rare mint marks, Carson City mostly, and a few New Orleans. Of those 47, 11 were in conditions Howard described as remarkable, a word he used quietly twice while holding individual coins under a jeweler's loupe. There were also 1,841 Eisenhower dollars and Susan B. Anthony's, common but in uncirculated condition because they had sat sealed in glass for decades. And there were approximately $4,200 in pocket change, quarters, dimes, nickels, pennies, the working layer of 46 years of Friday afternoons. Howard finished his appraisal at 4:30 in the afternoon. He sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and wrote out a single number. He slid the notepad across the table to Earl. The number was $290,000 to $310,000, conservative estimate. Auction value with proper certification, possibly higher. Earl looked at the number. Then he looked at the jar. Then he looked out the kitchen window, the one that faced east, the one Margaret had asked him to build that way in 1976. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "She knew." Susan, sitting next to him, said, "What did she know, Earl?" "She knew the bank gave me old coins sometimes. She would notice when I pulled them out of my pocket on Friday nights. She'd hold them up and look at them and put them back in. She never said anything, but she knew." Susan nodded slowly. "And she knew this was coming," Earl said. "Somehow she knew." Susan filed the response to First Heartland's reactivation letter on the following Monday. The response was 3 pages. It included the 1998 payoff letter, the amortization schedule, and the original mortgage discharge filed with the Caldwell County Recorder. It also included a 4th document, a FOIA request filed simultaneously with the Missouri Division of Finance, asking for any consumer complaints filed against First Heartland Bank's Legacy Account Resolution Division in the past 24 months. Susan had not expected to hear back from the bank quickly. Reactivation cases, she knew, usually dragged for months. Banks delayed. Banks negotiated. Banks waited for the homeowner to settle out of exhaustion. First Heartland's legal department called her office at 9:14 the next morning. That was the part Susan told Earl about later. The speed. "Earl," she said on the phone, "they called within 26 hours. That tells me everything I need to know. They know what they did." The bank's lawyer wanted to schedule a settlement meeting. Susan said she would think about it. Then she filed a 2nd document, a class action notice of inquiry, naming First Heartland Bank and listing 4 other Caldwell County residents who had received identical reactivation letters. She had found them through Earl. Earl had asked around. 3 were people he had known for 40 years. The bank's lawyer called back the same afternoon. This time the offer was different. Full withdrawal of the reactivation claim, written apology, and a settlement to Earl personally for administrative distress of $85,000. Susan told Earl about the offer that evening. "What do you want to do?" she asked. Earl thought about it. He thought about Margaret, about the jar, about the 28 other people on Tyler Brennan's spreadsheet, 6 who had already paid, 2 who had died. "Tell them no," Earl said. "Tell them we want it for everyone, every name on that list, or we go to court." The bank folded on a Friday. A letter arrived by certified mail, signed by First Heartland's regional vice president, formally withdrawing the reactivation claim against Earl Dempsey. The letter also confirmed that all 28 other reactivation cases in Caldwell and Clinton counties had been terminated. The 6 who had paid would receive full refunds with interest. The 2 estates of the deceased would receive payment as well. Tyler Brennan was reassigned. The reactivation program was suspended pending an internal review. Susan brought the letter out to the farm on a Saturday morning. Earl read it once at the kitchen table, then again slower this time. Then he set it down. "That's it?" he said. "That's it," Susan said. "No court, no trial. They knew what they had done. Earl nodded. He stood up and walked to the basement door. He went down the stairs and stood for a minute at the workbench. The jar was gone. Howard had taken it to be properly stored and certified in pieces in archival containers in Kansas City. Earl had told him to sell every coin that was worth selling. The shelf above the workbench was empty. Earl came back upstairs. "I'm going to pay the property tax," he said. "It was due Monday." Susan smiled. "Earl, you can afford a lot more than property tax now." "I know," Earl said, "but that's what's due." Earl drove into Hamilton that afternoon. He drove past the First Heartland branch without looking at it. He went to the county tax office and paid the property tax in cash, $862, from his wallet. He drove home in the truck, the same truck he'd driven for 26 years. He sat in the driveway for a few minutes with the engine off, looking at the house. The kitchen window faced east, and the afternoon light was coming in sideways through the glass, and he could see, just barely, the corner of the table where Margaret used to sit. His phone rang. It was Susan. She was calling to tell him that one of the other depositors, a woman named Ruth Caraway, who had paid $19,000 to the bank in February, had just received her refund. Earl heard Ruth laughing on the other end of the line, faintly in the background of Susan's call, laughing the way someone laughs when they didn't believe something would actually happen, and then it did. Earl listened to Ruth laugh. He didn't say anything for a minute. Then he told Susan thank you, and he hung up, and he got out of the truck, and he went inside to make his dinner. Earl Dempsey was not the only one. There were others. 28 other names on Tyler Brennan's spreadsheet, 28 other letters, 28 other people in Caldwell and Clinton counties who got the same reactivation notice in the same 6-month window. 6 of them paid before Earl ever walked into that bank with the jar. But there's another name on a different spreadsheet, in a different county, 2 states over. A woman named Lorraine Hatch, 76 years old, in Saline County, Nebraska. She got her own letter in April. Hers wasn't from First Heartland. It was from a different bank entirely. Same language, same 14 minutes of review, same MBA on the other end. And what Lorraine had in her hall closet was something nobody, not the bank, not the lawyer, not even her own children, knew was there. That story is next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. We'll see you there. Paste your script.